Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring the human search for meaning, especially in a world that just seems to be overflowing with information and, things changing so fast. Have you ever felt lost in all that chaos? Like, what does it all mean?
Well, it's a question that's been around for a long time, and it's definitely even more relevant now than ever.
Right. And we have some fascinating sources to help guide us through this. We'll be looking at Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus, a TED Talk by Sir Ken Robinson all about creativity, and then a Psychology Today article on handling change. So we're going to kind of jump all over the place, but I think it will all tie together in the end.
Yeah, we are. We're setting out on this journey to answer this question. If life doesn't just come pre-packaged with meaning, how do we create a meaning that feels real and fulfilling in this complex world?
Yeah. And I think it all starts with something that we as humans are just drawn to. Stories. We love them. We use them to make sense of the world and our place in it.
Right. Think about the circle of life, or even bigger concepts like nationalism, communism. I mean, we create these narratives to try to understand our existence.
Even something as personal as, romantic love, it's a story that we tell ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. And these stories, they're powerful. They give us a sense of belonging, purpose, even shape our identity. But, and here's the catch, they often present an incomplete picture. They can be biased. Sometimes they're just not true.
And Harari actually challenges our ideas about legacy by asking, if you're dead, how would you know if people were, reciting poems in your honor? It's pretty deep when you think about it. It makes you think about what really matters.
It really does. It highlights the fact that a story's power, it doesn't have to come from being true. It comes from its ability to connect us to something bigger than ourselves, give us a role to play. Whether it's true or not is another question.
Right. So if stories can be fictional, how do they become so real to us? How do we kind of embody them in our daily lives? And that's where I think rituals come in. So think about religious ceremonies or nationalistic displays. They take these abstract ideas and they turn them into these tangible experiences.
Yeah, rituals, they're the bridge between, something that you can't touch or feel and then making it real.
Harari gives this fun little example about the origin of the phrase hocus pocus. Apparently, it comes from the Latin phrase hoc est corpus, used in Catholic Mass. So it's kind of a funny example, but it shows how rituals can make a story seem so important, and it blurs the lines between what's made up and what's real.
And this happens every day. I mean, look at our national flags, our anthems. I
Right.
mean, these symbols, they evoke powerful emotions. They make us feel connected to our country, to our fellow citizens. I mean, have you ever felt, moved during the national anthem? I mean, that's the power of ritual in action.
It's amazing how these things that seem so simple can mean so much. But what about when we add in the concept of sacrifice? It gets a little darker then, I think.
Yeah, sacrifice. It can really solidify our belief in a story, even if that story is just not true. It's a pretty powerful psychological thing.
Harari says it's because we don't like to admit when we've been fooled or when we've done something wrong.
Yeah.
So we stick to the story to justify all the sacrifices we've made. It's like a defense mechanism, almost.
Yeah, and this can have some really terrible consequences. The massacre of Jews in Mashhad, Iran, back in 1839 is a really tragic example of this. A misinterpretation of a ritual mixed with prejudice, and it led to this awful violence.
It's a reminder that stories and rituals, they can be used for good or for evil. And this leads us to the dangers of ideologies like fascism and nationalism.
Yeah.
They demand total loyalty to the story, and they can be very seductive, very powerful.
Right. Harari makes this really important point. These ideologies, they don't start out ugly. They attract people by offering this, this simple worldview, this feeling of belonging, being part of something grand, like a bundle of rods, that idea. One rod is weak, but together they're strong.
But that unity can come at a huge price. Like, look at Nazi Germany. It's just one example in history where blind loyalty to the group led to just horrible suffering. It's like the needs of the individual just get completely ignored.
It's like the story becomes more important than anything else. Even basic human compassion goes out the window. And what's really scary is how these ideologies rely on sacrifice. They demand absolute devotion, and people are expected to give up their own needs for the so-called good of the group.
So it makes you wonder, what happens when the story we believe in asks us to compromise our own values or the well-being of other people? Is it time to start questioning the story itself? Maybe even the idea of the self. Maybe that's a story too, shaped by all these forces around us. Are we really the authors of our own narratives? Or are we just playing a role that's been written for us?
Now, that's a question worth thinking about. especially in our world today where there are so many things trying to influence who we are.
Yeah, like think about social media, right? And all these perfect online personas that we create.
It's like we're building these ideal versions of ourselves, exactly these fantasy selves that kind of distract us from our real lives, our actual experiences.
Yeah, have you ever felt that pressure to like portray a certain image online,
Mm.
even if it's not really who you are?
Oh, yeah, it's a struggle a lot of us face. And it creates this disconnect between our online and offline selves.
Right. So how do we get back to that genuine self? The one that's, underneath all the layers.
Well, Harari has an interesting idea. He says we need to just directly observe our body and mind. He says his own meditation practice has helped him untangle himself from those manufactured stories and get a better understanding of who he really is.
So it's like looking in the mirror, right? But really, honestly, without judging.
Exactly. It might be uncomfortable sometimes, but, facing the good, the bad, the ugly within ourselves, it's essential for self-discovery.
It's about going deeper than the surface and connecting with that core being. Which brings us to another important point. Creativity. In a world that's changing so fast, the ability to think creatively, to adapt, to come up with new solutions, that's more valuable than ever.
And that's where Sir Ken Robinson comes in. With his TED Talk, he talks about how we need to nurture creativity, especially in education.
He tells a great story about this little girl who's drawing a picture of God, and the teacher's like, but nobody knows what God looks like. And the girl says, well, they will in a minute. Such a great example of that, that pure creativity that kids have.
And Robinson argues that our traditional education systems, with all the standardized tests and the focus on conformity, they actually stifle that natural creativity. We teach kids to follow the rules instead of encouraging them to use their imagination, to experiment, to take risks.
It's like we're forcing them to fit into this mold instead of letting them break free and think outside the box.
Exactly. And we end up limiting their potential as individuals and as a society. Robinson also shares the story of Gillian Lynn. She was a dancer who really struggled in school. She couldn't sit still. They labeled her as having a learning disorder. But then her mom took her to a specialist, and he realized that Gillian just needed to move to think. She needed a different environment to thrive.
It shows that there are so many different ways to be intelligent, and we need to celebrate those differences instead of trying to make everyone the same.
Absolutely. And in a world that's facing these rapid technological advancements and so much uncertainty about the future, fostering creativity is crucial. We need people who can adapt, who can innovate, who can come up with solutions to the challenges we're facing.
So we've talked about the limits of stories, the power of rituals and sacrifice, the dangers of blind loyalty, the importance of self-observation, and the need for creativity. All these things, they're all connected when it comes to understanding how we create meaning in a world that's constantly changing. But how do we actually deal with all this change in our everyday lives?
Well, that's where the Psychology Today article gives us some practical advice. It helps us connect those big, abstract ideas to strategies we can actually use.
The article talks about acknowledging our emotions, both the good and the bad, because change can be a real roller coaster.
It also suggests things like journaling, making lists of what's changed, and most importantly, reaching out to people we trust for support.
Having a good support system, whether it's family, friends, a therapist, it makes a huge difference. It reminds us that we don't have to go through these transitions alone.
Right. And the article also talks about focusing on what we can control, even when everything feels chaotic. Taking a step back, assessing the situation, making a plan, it helps us to be proactive instead of just reacting to everything that's happening.
It's like having an internal compass to guide us through all the ups and downs. But even with the best compass, we still face that big question. If life doesn't come with a script, how do we create our own meaning?
I think if we're not tied to just one single narrative, then we actually have the freedom and the responsibility to create meaning from our experiences, however messy and unpredictable those experiences might be.
I don't know, it's exciting, but also kind of scary, right? It's like we're the authors of our own lives, but we don't even know what genre we're writing.
But isn't that part of what makes it so amazing? The open-endedness, the possibility, for reinvention, for growth, for finding meaning in the most unexpected places.
It's not about the destination, it's about the journey, right?
It really is. The journey itself is where the meaning is. It's in those relationships we build, the challenges we overcome, the moments of both joy and sorrow, those small acts of kindness, and even the big things we do that make us feel truly alive.
It's about being present, being engaged, being open to new experiences,
Oh.
and being willing to, let go of the stories that just aren't working for us anymore.
But it's about realizing that meaning, it's not something fixed and unchanging. It evolves as we evolve.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive,
Hmm.
what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, we've talked about a lot. We've explored the limitations of those stories we tell ourselves, the power of rituals and sacrifice, the dangers of blind loyalty, the importance of self-observation, and the need to really nurture that creativity within ourselves. These are all essential pieces for figuring out how we create meaning in a world that just keeps changing.
And we also touched on some practical strategies for navigating all that change, right? Like acknowledging our emotions, seeking support, and focusing on the things that we can actually control.
Yeah, absolutely. Here's a final thought for everyone to kind of chew on. What if, instead of searching for one big story to define our entire lives, we embrace the idea that meaning is something we cultivate, something we create through our actions, our relationships, and our engagement with the world around us?
That's a pretty big shift in perspective. It's moving from passively accepting a story to actively creating our own.
Exactly. It means that even with all the uncertainty and change, we still have the power to shape our own lives, to find purpose and meaning in ways that are authentic to us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope this has inspired you to think a little differently about how you create your own meaning.
Remember, self-discovery is a journey. It's not about reaching some final destination. It's about embracing the process of becoming.
So until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep writing the story of your life.